Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video is about Mr. Steven Crowder. I watch Loud with Crowder quite a lot, and his show is compelling viewing. Trying to think what he's like, more like a middle-brow version of Ben Shapiro, but he's obviously got much more geniality than Ben Shapiro, who's short in the emotional intelligence stakes. He's your male version of Tomi Lahren, but you know he's not got this furious, judgmental style that she has, and he's a highbrow edition of her. It struck me that maybe he chose this occupation out of nominative determinism. I've developed a fixation with this notion, and that is that someone's personality and life experience is shaped by their name. I know it's overblown, doesn't work in every case by any means, but in some cases, someone's name seems to be oddly apposite, considering what they do. Now, probably the many counterexamples, perhaps there's nothing to it. But Crowder as a name, so he obviously seeks an audience, like a crowd, things like that. Where does the Stephen come in? Well, I don't know how Stephen would shape you. Like Saint Stephen, I don't think he wants to be martyred like that. Anyhow, he's a Canadian-American. So, was he born in Canada? I think he was in Montreal. And he doesn't like French pronunciations of Francophone toponyms. Montreal. And then he grew up in the United States. He's now in Texas. So he used the fact that he was Canadian to lend him credibility when he's lambasting the very notion of publicly funded healthcare. He's very much for a publicly funded military and saying, oh, it's terrible, men with guns are going to come and take tax. Well, he doesn't say that when they're funding the military or the CIA or the FBI or the courts or Congress or anything else. You like guns. You know, you're a gun nut. Not being too rude, you're a gun rights advocate, put it that way. The police, they shoot dead unarmed black people, you never seem to object. So why would you dislike men with guns coming? That's how the West was won. That's tough. That's all American, I would have thought, like apple pie. Because, you know, the military is socialist. You can't opt out of it, say, no, I don't want the military to defend me, or I'm opting out of that war. My tax is not going to that war. It goes to whether you like it or not. If the government can use public funds to kill people, can I not use them to save people? Now, I know killing people is sometimes right. It's sometimes right to fight. The police occasionally are obliged to shoot somebody, but you know, it's happening willy-nilly in this case. So, a bit like hurricane relief. Are you against that? Is that socialist? Just let them die. They had their house blown away. Pfft, that's your problem. What about patriotism? Is not caring about everybody? Anyway, his show is high octane. It's very energetic. It's highly engaging. It's almost like performance art. He was a voice actor, and it shows, and a comic. So, you know, he's got the looks, even though he's on the radio. He's a handsome chap. And I'm not one of those straights who's so insecure in my sexuality that I can't recognise another man is physically alluring. Okay, a lot of women would go for him. I suppose a lot of gays would go for him too. Looks after himself doing mixed martial arts fighting. He's middlebrow. He plays up the machismo, not to a ludicrous degree. So he's one of the fun shock jocks. Comes across as personable. Leave aside his political opinions for a moment. Whether you agree with them or not, he seems like he's good company. Yeah, he's affable, he's upbeat. He's never furious, actually, which is a welcome break. I find it refreshing because so many of these right-wing pundits come across as irate, judgmental, sneering, uptight, deeply unattractive characters. So what he offers is infotainment. He's sometimes placid and courteous, and I think one of the most honourable things he does is this Change My Mind series, where he'll put his desk in the public and take on all comers. Anybody want to sit down and have a courteous discussion? Not really an argument, not a mindless big tent, not pretending we agree with each other, just a civil exchange of views, and that's the way it should be, because it creates more heat than light when they have a slanging match. They're not shouting at each other. He's almost docile. He gives the person a chance to speak. So that's commendable, and I think that really raises the tone of public discourse. That's how we can exchange opinions and possibly find some common ground and get away from ideological bombardment and this infantile name-calling. His views are almost a checklist of American conservatism. He's a practicing Christian. Now, nothing wrong with that. But as others have observed, that religiosity seems to be like a gateway drug, if you will, for the conservative ideology in the United States. Incidentally, conservative is one of those words which means something radically dissimilar in British and American English. I was a member of the United Kingdom's Conservative Party, which is very different from American conservatism. So then, having decided you're a religious person, this is a lead-in to a political outlook, and there's a whole slew of attitudes which tend to go with that. Tend to, not always. You don't have to be a gun advocate. You don't have to be in favour of the death penalty. You don't have to be against redistributive taxation, things like that. You could be the other way. There is a religious left as well. You could be a non-religious person who agrees with both the conservatism, but there seems to be a very strong correlation there. So he ticks all the boxes, as I pointed out, but that's not a bad thing per se. But the only thing was a little bit independent-minded is when he said he was against bailing out the banks. Don't think he said it at the time, but maybe he didn't have his show. I had mixed feelings about that 10 years ago. It went against the grain to do it, and it didn't seem to encourage circumspection, because banks will say, well, we can pursue high-risk policies again. If we make a massive profit, all well and good. But if it ends in calamity, it doesn't matter, because we know big government's going to come to the rescue, and we're too big to fail. So it didn't seem to encourage banks to pursue a cautious and responsible policy. So it's quite moralistic, quite individual responsibility, and individual responsibility matters. So yeah, people have to make sensible choices and bear the consequences of those up to some point, but begs the question why we have government at all. It's often there to help us when we can't help ourselves. So he's positive about Trump. He's anti-gay, I think it's fair to say. Didn't seem to care that gays are dying of AIDS. Also gays aren't people. We should care about gay lives as much as any other life. And then it can get into the hetero community. Don't want anyone to die of AIDS. Gay, straight, doesn't matter. So he doesn't seem to want any restrictions whatsoever on firearms. Would you let criminals take them to prison? Would you let people take them to the court, into a bank, onto a plane? Let children have them, take them to school? Why not? Assault rifles, bazookas, general purpose machine guns, bombs, jets, tanks, nuclear weapons? Why not? Arms for the Palestinians. More guns, fewer deaths. That's what you think. Anyway, so he is a Zionist stalwart. He excoriates Black Lives Matter. He disbelieves in science, climate change, that it's not happening, it's not anthropogenic, it's not going to harm us, there's nothing we can do about it. So this is where he becomes a bit of a flat earther. Why not believe in the Stork theory of conception, for that matter? I don't think he's been drawn on evolution, though. But I concur with him on some issues like gender privilege, white privilege. I think he's largely on the money on that one. I mean, I know that racial prejudice exists in the United States, and African Americans get the worst of that because there are more whites to do the discriminating, and whites on average have more money or more likely to be in higher positions, as in a position to mistreat black people. Not suggesting that most white Americans do it, but a few of them do, and that has consequences. And he kind of exposes some of the ludicrous ideas of the loony left. So I'm with him on that one. Maybe the average left in America, I suppose that's about where I am. When he's on weak ground, he clowns. He becomes incendiary. He's got a gift for mimicry, and he'll start doing impersonations of politicians whom he wishes to lampoon. He'll become hyperactive. He'll be yelling madly, and he uses mirth to cover up gaps in his argument. He recognizes there's a flaw in the logic, so he'll misdirect, he'll distract his audience by turning it into a comedy skit. So he's very much chosen sides, and seems to defend that kind of almost blindly, not recognizing, okay, that I have to make a concession, there's a reservation here, actually this is a weak area for us, we are wrong on that one. And obviously liberals and left-wingers ought to do the same. So it comes across as a decent person, and he seems sincere. I think he believes what he says. And despite being an extrovert, and you need to be a bit of an exhibitionist to be in this sphere, and obviously besotted with the sound of one's own voice, he doesn't come across as too vain. It's not really about him. He does have bedrock beliefs. I suppose he's trying to make it a better world or uphold liberties, he would see it. So not all bad. I shall continue viewing him.